Learn all about living in Merida, Mexico from David Brody in this video interview with expats in Mexico. What was the big aha moment you had when you decided to move to Mexico?
I don't know if there was actually one. We had been reading in International Living many years. We read it and knew that we were interested in living elsewhere. So we had spent some vacation time in Puerto Rico and looked at Mexico. We looked further south, but we decided that Mexico was going to be it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, we thought that it was stable, and we really thought that the U.S. government would not let anything happen to its next door neighbor. So the idea of going to Belize or Guatemala or further south was off the list. So we decided on Mexico, and in fact, we bought retirement property along the Caribbean coast south of Cancun, thinking that's where we would retire. But later decided that we'd rather be where there was more going on. So we still have that property, which we need to now get about selling, and decided to come to Merida.
When did you go to Merida for the first time?
First time was on vacation, and that was around 1985, 86. Our timeshare offered the opportunity to swap your unit for a couple of hotel rooms, and we did that, and we liked it, and we came back again maybe 4 or 5 years later. So those were the first times, and it was about 6 or 7 years ago that we ended up buying this home.
What was it about Merida that you liked that was better than the Cancun area where you had your property?
Well, the area that we had the property was really quite remote. It was down near where they were building a new cruise ship port of Mahahual. So while it offered the opportunity to live on the water, we have 110 meters of beachfront, and I like to dive and fish, that the reefs there were pristine and all that. But we decided that in Merida, which is a wonderful cultural city, that there was just so much more to be done. There's museums, there's every park has Wi-Fi. It's a very progressive town, a city, and it has concerts every night. It was at one point one of the wealthiest cities in the world. As a result, there are universities, there's opera halls, concert halls. It's a very lovely city.
Why was it such a rich city?
It was rich because the Yucatan Peninsula has terrible land for growing things. It's all just raised up flat seabed. And the one thing that does grow here, however, are henequen or sisal plants. They look sort of like agave plants, big succulents. And the industry that developed was rope making. And during the Industrial Revolution, once steam power came, it became very big here. So out in the countryside, the haciendas, which Americans would tend to think of as almost like plantations, attracted people from around the world with the idea of a better life, which they did not provide for them. So they got their workers, and the wealthy people, in addition to having these spectacular homes, decided they wanted a social life as well, so they invested in the city of Merida. There's a grand boulevard there with all these old mansions, many of which are now banks, and just spectacular buildings. And so that's where Merida's wealth came from, and its wealth faded right after World War II with the coming of synthetic fibers.
Your home looks beautiful. Tell us about it.
This home was the front part. We're in a real Mexican neighborhood. We're the only expats right here. Most of the expats live closer to the very center of town. We're about 12 blocks away. The very front was the original house, and it had 2 rooms and a connecting area. The back was all, because it was the original house on the block, it had a very large backyard. And the men who bought it and designed this house lived here for many years. We're quite friendly with them. The new construction, which is now about 12 years old, is built in the hacienda style. In other words, 20-foot ceilings, big archways, My son, who was the teacher, studied Roman architecture and walked in and immediately said, "Oh, this is based on a Roman villa," which I would not have known, having been a science guy. So it's got a large indoor atrium. It's the bulk of the house is at first a little overwhelming because of its volume. Its height is great. And then the room that I'm currently sitting in is sort of a screened-in patio room, which leads out to the large backyard with a 40-foot pool.
Sounds marvelous.
It is marvelous.
How much yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, having moved from New Jersey, where we had the pleasure of the highest property taxes in the country, to a house that is probably even somewhat nicer than the one we had there, our property taxes went from $18,000 to $55 a year. Yes.
And how much did you pay for your house?
We bought an expensive house at the time. It was about $420,000.
Well, compared to many states in the in America, that's a good deal.
So this house in New Jersey would have been $1.5 million, $2 million, something like that.
Sure. How many bedrooms and bathrooms do you have?
We have 3 bedrooms. We have 3 baths.
How many square feet?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask me that. I would guess about 4,000.
Oh my, that's really a beautiful, wonderful place to live.
It's a big house, and it's nice when our kids come down. There's plenty of room. Once you're in here, it's not so doesn't feel as large because you get used to the height of the rooms.
Yeah. You said you're 12 blocks from city center. Are you north of town?
We are south of town, yes. And in Merida, the south of town is limited by the presence of the airport, which is about 5-7 minutes from here. So all the development, the modern development of Merida is to the north. So if we want to, for example, go to all the American big box stores or the gigantic malls or all of that, or the newer neighborhoods with homes that are not necessarily Yucatecan in style but are luxurious, we have to go to the north side of the center of town.
Since you're fairly new to living full time in Merida, have you had an opportunity to get to know many people in the expat community?
We have. We've been coming here for 6 or 7 years, and fortunately, our friends who built the house have introduced us to their friends. And then Joanne and I are also pretty free with meeting up with people, and just my kids used to say we could bond with anybody. So we often would just see somebody and start talking, or if we were walking our dogs, people would notice them. And so we've made quite a few expat friends, but fortunately many Mexican friends as well.
Well, you said you lived in more of a Mexican neighborhood. How are your Spanish skills?
Well, it depends on who you ask. My children are fluent. My wife thinks she is, and keeps reminding me that I'm not. But
so you have an impossible standard to meet.
Pretty much, but I also haven't taken the time. Like, I can carry on conversations, but I know I'm not speaking properly, and that really does drive me crazy for one who always made my children speak properly. I haven't taken the time to learn how to conjugate my verbs properly. But I seem to understand people, and they seem to understand me.
You mentioned that you go to Chiapas during the summer, I think it is. So you just go down there and live down there for how many months?
Well, this is the first time we've been able to do anything for many months, because we've always been here just for a few weeks at a time and been to Chiapas for a few weeks at a time. So our plan is to go for about 2 to 3 months in Chiapas. It's mostly because of the weather.
Because it's much cooler.
Much cooler. It's at altitude.
In the mountains of Chiapas.
Yes, in a volcanic area, about 2.5 hours drive now from the state capital.
And what will you be doing this summer?
Staying cool, for one. This summer, taking care of some puppies, which unless we're able to sell them all before we go. And we will have our dental mission coming. We have students from Montreal coming. And in the rest of the time, it's going to be sort of laid back as compared to life here in Merida.
So your work in Chiapas is basically free clinics for the indigenous people in Chiapas.
That's correct. We have all mobile equipment, and we'll go each day to an even smaller community and set up in a basketball court or something like that. And because many of these communities don't have running water or electricity, we basically just do extractions all day.
Are you beach people?
Not really. I mean, I like the water. To me, if I'm going to be on the ocean, I'd like it to have surf. So we're closest to the lovely Gulf beaches here, Gulf of Mexico beaches. But if I'm going to go spend a week on the beach, I'd rather be on the Caribbean side. And we still have a timeshare there, so we will spend a week there doing that. But if we want to go to the beach for a day, we'll go visit friends around Merida. It's about a half hour to the beaches on either side of the port of Progreso. And many of the expats, especially Canadians, live along there.
So it gets a little toasty there in Merida.
Gets mighty toasty. It reminds me of visiting our son and daughter-in-law in New Orleans. We've been having temperatures between 100 and 105 daily. And as the summer approaches, the humidity goes up. So it's pretty toasty here. The rest of the year, it's really quite nice. It's maybe 85 to 90 during the day and 60 at night.
What's the cost of living like down there for you guys?
The cost of living is very favorable. And I think the way to think about it is everything that the average Mexican would use is cheap. And everything that the average Mexican wouldn't use, or necessarily use, such as electronics or processed foods, things that require more manufacturing, is more expensive here than the States. But labor being as cheap as it is, it moves everything towards a inexpensive lifestyle. And we're able to, one could easily live on their Social Security, and while maybe not as a king, but you could live very comfortably.
And many do throughout Mexico.
Yeah.
Do you guys go out quite a bit?
Sure. Well, we do. Fortunately, my wife not only likes to cook, but is good at it. And I've become a star dish cleaner. So we do stay in and we do have friends over. But Merida has the full array of restaurants, from mom and pop little joints to very, what Mexicans would call very expensive businessmen's restaurants, but expensive here might be $25 or $30 per person, including seafood and wine and drinks. The entertainment is plentiful here. Every night of the week in a different park, there's a free concert. Every Sunday, they shut down the whole center of town, and there's dancing and music. There are multiple theaters here, and there's a symphony orchestra. So we do get out and do these things, and it's quite convenient.
That's why they have such a large expat community living in Merida.
Well, it's not as large as one might think. Certainly nowhere near the number of expats as one would find in San Miguel de Allende or in those large communities outside Guadalajara.
What are the three things that you love most about living in Merida?
Well, I think number one, the affordability that allowed us to retire at a pretty reasonable age is certainly high on the list. Most important, I think, is the people. It's, when they used to talk in American politics about family values, this is where it actually exists. People look after their family. They get very little from the government, but fortunately don't have to pay for it either, unlike in the States where we get very little from the government but pay a fortune. And I think the cultural opportunities here. It's a great city that's not all that big. And in speaking with people who have moved here more recently from other parts of Mexico, safety is a huge concern in Mexico, and Merida is routinely considered the safest city in Mexico.
What advice would you give to someone thinking about moving to Mexico?
My advice would be to not buy something right away, but to check out the different areas of the country to see what you like. And then it actually is not a difficult process to either become a resident. All those things are quite doable. And the other thing I think that would be wise would be to pick up some Spanish. We have several friends here, expats, who speak no Spanish, and I find that very odd. And they survive quite well, but I think that it opens you up to many more people if you can at least be polite and speak the language.
Hey, listen, David, thank you for taking your time today to speak with us at Expats in Mexico. We really enjoyed our conversation.
It's a pleasure, Bob, and I hope that that somebody watching this comes and visits Mexico and maybe finds the allure that we have seen, and wish them well.